dermatillomania, so is it that they're picking like scabs, or can it just be a night like a clean spot? There's no scab, there's nothing to pick, but they're just gonna pick skin, like healthy skin, or is it has to be a scab or something that they can remove, or a blemish? Do you know what I'm trying to ask?
Yeah. So typically there is some sort of little imperfection that
Okay.
they're kind of feeling. So
Okay.
it could be
A little
a little
pimple or
mole,
something to
a
mold. Okay.
pimple, yeah. And ironically with that, when someone with dermatillomania is they have like a pimple and they're trying to get rid of the pimple, but then sometimes it ends up going beyond that, and they pick at it so much that it causes damage.
Right.
And then when that area tries to heal, ironically, what they were trying to get rid of in this piece that we're talking about, the pimple, then it comes back as a scab and it starts the whole process over again,
Right.
because now there's a different type of blemish and it just creates even more trauma. So
I,
it's this vicious, again, repetitive.
yeah.
The word repetitive, it's this vicious cycle, and
Yeah.
it's really hard to get out of.
I understand. I understand. So when it comes to needles,
Mm-hmm.
because there's skin damage, which
Mm-hmm.
can cause resistance, right? It can be difficult to get pigment to implant in skin that is, unhealthy, or, damaged or traumatized in some sort of way. I lecture on needles. I'm a big advocate that, there's a big trend right now in the industry: single needle, single needle, single needle. Some trainers are teaching single needle on everything. That's all newbies are being taught. So
Mm-hmm.
would you concur that on a trick client where we're going to be meeting resistant skin, challenging
Mm-hmm.
skin, that a single needle and some of these smaller liners are not the most ideal needle? I mean, would you concur that like a 5 shader, a 7 shader, the larger shader configurations are going to be the best needle choice for these particular clients, due to the fact they pick up much more pigment, they
Mm-hmm.
implant much more pigment, which is needed when we're working with skin that wants to resist
Mm-hmm.
pigment. We need to get as much, we need to kind of beat the skin, kind
Yep.
of outmaneuver the skin,
Yes.
if you will. So
Yeah.
big needles picking up bigger amounts of pigment, implanting bigger amounts of pigment. And Jill, the larger needles do cause less trauma because the fact they implant more pigment, cover a larger surface area, we're in and out much quicker. So,
Yes.
do you agree?
I so I will say this. Yes, I agree with you. And I'm going to kind of come back to my little thing in the beginning. This is why this is just a couple of my new needles from you, but I mean, my cabinet is full of every shape and size of needles possible, because especially when it comes to someone with trick, I might start off with one and get so much resistance that I have to switch gears after I start the procedure. And I definitely find that with my trick clients, my shader needles are my go-to. I typically always start with a 5 just to kind of get started and see what happens. And sometimes I'm doing whip shading, sometimes I'm in there doing circular movements and things like that, or a combination. But shading needles really do tend to work well, just because there is so much trauma to the skin. And to your point too, Taryn, you're right. Like you do have to get as much pigment in there as possible. And the other thing too is, in terms of, if I fast forward into the healing part,
Yep.
the the client is going to, whether we want to believe it or not, or think that it's going to happen or not, they're going to continue to pull in that area typically, right? They're not just going to stop. And I talk about that in the course too. Like,
Yeah.
if it was so easy to just stop, we would all do it, but it's a mental
Right.
health disorder. So we have to get enough pigment in there that's going to kind of set them up for long term. But again, you have to have that really important conversation in the beginning about what's realistic and how often touch-ups might be needed, what they're going to look like for the first week or so. Because again, now we're talking, this is a high anxiety disorder, and there are comorbidity disorders that can come with it. So now you throw someone maybe who's already high anxiety with a really, really saturated looking eyebrow and they might be freaking out on day 2 or 3.
Right.
So all of that, it has to be taken into consideration. But I definitely, to go back to your question, Taryn, I do really like the shader needles for the shady needles for.
So that's your preferred needle? Yeah. Yeah, I would imagine. I've had my fair share of trick clients. So,
Sure.
you know, I've worked.
Sure you have.
Yeah, you know, and I still see them and refresh them. One thing that, and because, you know, I've been doing this 22 years and, you know, I've had, you know, I've worked on a lot of trick clients, you know, I didn't, you know, I knew your course would be super interesting to me. And I was surprised how much I was doing wrong with my trick clients. Yes, because one thing that you really pointed out, which really struck me, was don't ask. You talk a lot about proper grammar, how to properly speak to the BFRB client, what to say, what not to say. So you know, so I just want to highlight one aspect of that. You go into that deep on lots of different areas. One I would like to highlight is you advise not to tell your trick client, don't pick. Like, don't say that. And that's something that I did. I did until your course, you know. I would tell them, I mean, in a kind, loving way, you know, not in a scolding way, but you know, that don't pick, you know, try not to pick, you know, please don't pick. I don't know, you know, like sit on your hands. You know, I would just kind of have a little fun with it. And, you know, but you advise not to advise that, not to say that to a trick client. Why? Is it offensive? Have I been offending like my trick clients all these years without even knowing it? Or
I wouldn't say it's offensive. It's just kind of a known thing. Like, we don't want to pick.
Yeah.
So, you know, if we could quit picking that easy, then we wouldn't have these issues to begin with. So it's not that it's offensive. It just gives a different level of understanding is how I would look at it.
Okay.
As an artist, when we say, it's okay if you tell them not to pick, I'm sure I tell my trick clients not to pick at them. Instead of saying don't pick, what I will often say is the healing process is going to be a trigger. It's funny, I keep doing this with my hands. This is how I pull.
That's how you pull.
So I keep doing this, you know, but I'm not drinking tea. I'm just doing my thing. But I will often tell them, you know, instead of saying when they're healing, don't pick at them, that I would steer away from, just because that's an obvious thing for someone, you know, most people, but especially someone with a trick, they know that they shouldn't pick even without permanent makeup. So what I often try to lean towards is the healing process is going to be a trigger for you. When that happens, if and when that happens, here are some things to do to try and get your hands busy, because that's the key. It's a mental thing. So when we have these impulses and it's like, I gotta pull, I'm telling you, when that shit enters your mind, it is really hard to steer away from it. And once you get started, it is like the floodgates have opened, and that's even harder. So it's easier and I'm saying not everybody is the same, but oftentimes it's easier for people with trichotillomania or even dermatillomania to try to divert their thought process before they start, because once they start, it's oftentimes game over.
So you personally, when you got your eyebrows tattooed, did you pick?
I did.
You did?
I was just gonna share that story. So when I first had mine done, I guess it was about 5 years ago, I was at my second BFRB conference in Chicago. No, it was in St. Louis.
So and you were at a conference and you had your brows, so they were freshly tattooed while you were at a conference.
Yeah, they were probably done about 5 days before I went. And I wasn't, I know a lot of times it's, when people get their permanent makeup done, they're worried about being out in public while they're healing or whatever. As an artist and as a client at that time, I was proud of it. I was excited to go to the conference and show people, like, this is a great service. Find an artist in your area. I can help you find somebody if you need somebody. So I was all jacked up. And the second night of the conference, I was on, like I said, probably day 5, 6, somewhere around there of the healing. So they were getting kind of peely a little bit. I went to my hotel room And I had the urge and I was like, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. I was staying in my room all by myself. And I started pulling. I actually took pictures of myself that night that I still have to this day.
Were you
I
pulling the
was so
hair?
upset.
Were you pulling
I
the
was pulling the
hair or
hair.
picking scabs, or probably both? I would imagine if you're pulling hair, you're taking some scabs off at the same
Yes.
time.
So the healing was the trigger,
The
but I'm
healing.
going after the hair.
What about
The
the
hair.
healing was the what about the healing
Itchy.
was the trigger for
Itchy.
you? Itchy.
Itchy.
Itchy. So
Yes.
because
And the texture. It's like, I mean, if
texture.
you talk to people with trick, they'll kind of go like this over their brows because it's like, oh, that one feels funky, and then they just kind of get started. So
Right.
people
So
have
they're
different triggers.
so they're looking
That's
for. So they're great, like they're grazing their skin with their fingers, looking for any like a bump or anything textured, anything raised. Constantly
yes,
scanning the skin.
yes.
Okay.
Even looking in the mirror, if I see a hair that's like, my brows are coarse, so that's even, for me, that makes it even worse. When I wear mascara, I will pick my eyelashes and pull my eyelashes way more than when I don't wear mascara. That's why you don't see me really with any eye makeup on. Either I have so many gaps in my eyelashes that I think it looks stupid when I put mascara on because it just enunciates the the gaps, or the mascara is almost like kind of drying at the end of the day and it's a trigger, and I'll start kind of like picking that mascara off, and before you know it,
You're
I'll
pulling
pull
the
up
hairs.
6 7 lashes
Yeah.
at one time.
Yeah.
So it's the actual healing part of what the trigger is. It could be the texture of it, it could just be the look of it. Someone might look in the mirror and be like, ooh, that's tempting, I want to pick that or pull that out. So
Right.
but for me, I pulled out, I think almost every single hair that I had grown back in my brow area, I pulled out that night at that conference.
Gotcha.
Everyone.
So, and you mentioned that we did an Instagram live together, and you mentioned that a lot of BFRB clients, they don't mention it in their client intake forms. Like they don't. So first, should PMU artists have that question on their intake form? Or do you have trichotillomania, dermatillomania, or any like BFRB? Should they have that question on their intake form? That's part one. And part two is, why do some BFRB clients do not check that they do have that mental disorder?
Sure. Those are great questions. So the first part, should it be on the intake form? Yes, I think personally it should absolutely be on the
Like
intake form.
100%. That needs to be on
Yes.
every single permanent makeup artist intake form. Okay.
Yes, because what it's going to do is help you to understand how you proceed with the client. It's going to help you determine your needle selection, how you're going to talk to them about aftercare. Aftercare conversations are a little bit different for someone with trichotillomania than your traditional client. So it's going to help the artist to understand, okay, I have a trichotillomania client, so I'm gonna proceed a little bit differently, and I'm gonna do A, B, and C instead of X, Y, Z for this client. But that said, on the form, instead of it saying, "Do you have trichotillomania?" a lot of people don't even know what that is. Even if they have it, they don't understand it. So I get a lot of clients who will come to me and say, "I didn't even know that was a thing. I've been doing that since I was 7.
Wow.
I just thought I was weird, or I had no idea." So what happens is when you put it on your form is, do you have trichotillomania or a body focused repetitive behavior? They're literally going to be like, what the hell is she talking about? It's not going to make any sense. So what I would word it as is, I would put the actual term, because I'm big on proper language out of respect for this disorder. So I would absolutely put, do you have trichotillomania or dermatillomania? In parentheses behind each one, trichotillomania, hair pulling, dermatillomania, skin picking. And, kind of not necessarily define it, but give them some sort of description to go with it, because a lot of people wouldn't check the box because they just don't realize that they have a disorder.
Right.
And the reason for that, for a lot of the research I've done and just in my marketing background and my business background and all kinds of stuff like that. But generational differences are huge. And you and I talked about this, Taryn, on the live for a couple weeks back too. But you know, I'm the product of baby boomers, and baby boomers are kind of, again, generally speaking, kind of a sweep it under the rug. We don't air our dirty laundry in public. And I was, not that my parents never said that to me, because unfortunately I was too ashamed and embarrassed to tell them that I was doing this since I was 11, because I didn't know what it was. And I was, like I said, ashamed and embarrassed. But a lot of times generational gaps or generational differences will dictate how those of us with these disorders respond or react to someone having
Yeah,
that.
for sure.
And I think you even mentioned too, like you totally could understand that side of it, but it's a
Yeah.
huge part. And
Yeah,
and I
of
don't think
course.
that kind of stuff is talked about enough in terms of mental health disorders in general
No.
and things like this.
Absolutely not, and you're right, because there's a lot of shame attached, or there was. We're trying to break that now, right? We're trying to get rid of the shame, and
Right.
that was one reason I started talking openly about my mental, disorders. You know, my OCD, my anxiety, and I think my anxiety, like my main issue, is probably the recycling thoughts, the recycling. You know, I'm a manic thinker, and the recycling repetitive thoughts, which when I can't break that, definitely leads to anxiety and certainly depression, because some of the recycling thoughts, they can be destructive thoughts, negative thoughts, thoughts of, bad things happening, they're not always positive thoughts.
Yes.
Now where I am with that is, as I've learned coping tools. I've had this sense, as little, Jill, and there was no help. It wasn't talked about. We didn't talk about trichotillomania. We didn't talk about anxiety. We didn't talk about depression. We didn't talk about bipolar. That generation didn't even talk about money.
No.
Yeah, it's like that was a taboo subject. You don't talk about money. You keep your money private. You don't talk about money. And nowadays, I think we still have a long ways to go, but we've gotten a lot better. I mean, you have big, strong, successful athletes and, masculine, strong, talking about, mental disorders and depression. And so we're lifting the veil of shame, and we're all starting to be more transparent. We're having open discussions about it, which is healthy. It's healthy
Yes.
for people. It's healthy for communities. It does, getting it off your chest and talking about it and feeling you have a community that you can relate to, shares a lot of the same struggles as you do, is super healing. I think just not feeling alone. Like
Yes.
and isolated with your own behaviors and thoughts and depression, right? Feeling like you have a community, you're not alone, is super healing. So I think maybe the fact that they don't know what it is, they don't even know they have it, is one reason they don't check it on the client form, and possibly shame and embarrassment that
Yes,
they have it, that they're not checking it on the form. Yeah. So I 100% agree with you. Everybody, listening to this podcast right now, all our listeners, if trichotillomania and dermatillomania are not on your forms, as soon as this podcast is over, pull your forms up, edit them, and add that.
Yes.
And there's other things, so many other things that you suggest and encourage PMU artists to not do, in order to be a good artist, a good peering artist, the right artist for a trichotillomania or dermatillomania client, and even like an advocate, kind of. You know what I mean? I mean, when you connect with someone, especially someone doing a service, and you can talk about your disorder. I mean, there's a human connection. There's a human connection. So I would imagine it feels probably, you could answer this. It probably feels really, really good and beautiful for a BFRB client to choose an artist that understands the disorder, speaks properly about it, uses proper grammar, has compassion, has knowledge, and can guide them through the tattooing procedure and the healing procedure. I mean, that just must feel like, oh, God, right? It must feel so good.
It does feel good.
Yeah.
It does feel good. And there's another level to that too, where as artists, it really positions us in another level of kind of empowerment and confidence in being able to help and serve clients who have BFRBs, because we already are good at what we do, right? We know that we can help a lot of people, but when we can speak the language and talk the talk and walk the walk with those clients, almost like in hand with them, instead of just throwing them out the door, it really throws a whole new level of trust. And those clients are going to go, they have BFRB communities. There are Facebook groups. There are, the conferences I go to, there's hundreds of people there that have my disorder. And there's a lot of connection, just like we have connections in, cancer survivor groups, right, and alopecia groups and all these other things. The same thing is out there for trick and derm. So when you position yourself as a PMU artist who really understands and wants to help clients with trick and derm out of a place of compassion and really wanting to help, it really will, the success will follow. If you're doing it for the right reasons, the success will follow, just like anything else that we do.
Right. And I'm going to take that one step further. So so this is not really a procedural course. So, so there might be some, students or artists out there perusing courses that might overlook this course, thinking, well, this isn't going to increase my clientele. This is not going to increase my skill level, and they might pass it by. And I would dare say, no, don't do that. I think this can absolutely make you a much better artist, right? Especially for that particular client. It can increase your clientele when you're, right? Because as you said, in your course, they do get a certificate of training that they can proudly, post in their studio, post it on their Facebook page. They can go onto their Facebook page, their Instagram, their bio, their website, and dedicate just a small little paragraph that they, on their own accordance, took the initiative to take a BFRB course and understand the trick and derm client, and post their certificate. And as you said, they can, and people in their community will come across that and feel comfortable reaching out. And as you said, they can go into Facebook groups, like there's mummy groups, like you said, there's mom groups, there's groups for trick and derm.
There's a group for everything.
Yeah, they can join these groups.
And on a Tuesday.
Yeah, exactly. So, right? I know. I'm peeling eggs, for cripe's sakes. All that. Yeah, but it's true. But they can go into these groups, become members of these groups, and introduce themselves as a PMU artist that took a course and educated themselves on BFRBs, and all this stuff. So absolutely, it's just going to increase your network of clientele and cause you to I think it causes you to stand out amongst your peers in your city, in your area, for sure. And because I think all of us are working on trick clients, whether they know it or not. I mean, right? They're seeking our services because we're, it's just so beneficial what we can do for a trick and a derm client, right? Yes. So beneficial.
And also, in addition to what you're saying, even the statistic around it is 1 in 20 people have a BFRB. 1 in 20 is a staggering number. That is actually more common than anorexia. It's more common than a lot of the disorders that we at least hear about, even if we're not, working on those types of clients every day in our studios. But 1 in 20 people is a huge number. That's like a child in every single classroom. And when you really break that down and you think about how many clients you're doing in a week, I'm sure most people do close to, you know, 10 to 20 or whatever amount they're doing in a week,
Right.
depending on their schedules. But statistically, you're working on at least one a week, which equates to quite a few a year. So
Right.
again, and then those clients are going to go and tell their friends or their, you know, their network of people who have trick or derm, and it's just going to kind of blow up from there. But there's a lot of people who have it, and researchers believe that that number is actually higher, which I do agree with. It is most common in females, which is another point of permanent makeup. We are in a female dominant industry. Yes, we serve the male population, but the reality is we are in a female dominant industry in permanent makeup. So the majority of people with trick is female and derm. The onset for dermatillomania is actually usually around the age of 19. So it hits at a later rate.
Yeah.
Trichotillomania, the onset is usually adolescence, like 9 to 13. So you're really, you know, and dermatillomania is going to carry in trick most commonly into adulthood. Right. But researchers believe that more men have it. It's just we're talking about that belief that generational differences we were talking earlier about, Taryn, with not talking about things and you kind of sweep it under the rug. Guys kind of have this, you know,
for sure.
Oh, I'm fine, you know, nothing's wrong with me. I'm not going to talk about that. So researchers believe that it is more common in men too. And actually, I have had quite a few men with trichotillomania reach out to me for doing their eyebrows, and that's a whole nother part of it too.
Right.
But, it's a very, very high number of people who have trick. And one thing that I should say BFRB, because trick and derm, so 1 in 20 is a big number. But the other thing too that I wanted to mention, it is talked about in much more detail in the course, but in terms of this being a mental health disorder and some of these comorbidities that go with it, it's so important to understand those as a PMU artist, because when we have more knowledge about how this is going to affect this person emotionally or mentally and physically in the process after they leave our studio, it's only going to help us be more prepared before they even enter. For example,
and more patient.
Right. So statistically, or I guess scientifically, there's a lot of science that is built into this course. We're talking about the skin and all that kind of stuff, but let's talk about menstrual cycle.
Yeah.
Women are more prone to pull, I believe it's a week before their menstrual cycle.
Right.
So when you're talking about timing out, if you know you have a client with trick, and no, of course you're not going to put on your form like, when do you get your menstrual cycle? But you can have these conversations, and you might be able to reduce those impulses and those repetitive urges from that client if you can plan their permanent makeup service around that high point of when they're more likely to pull. So this course isn't just like the simplicities of focused repetitive behaviors and, oh, well, I can Google that and look that up and whatever. No, we're getting into the physical part, the emotional part, the mental part.
Right.
How can you plan ahead? What does it look like during the procedure? And what does that look like after, as support for this client, and not just tossing them out the door and saying, don't pick.
Absolutely.
There's so much involved in the course that is so different than what artists have seen in courses for procedural videos. And I'm really proud of it.